I have a feeling that growing up in Utah is pretty unique because there are so many Mormons there. Now, I grew up in Wisconsin as a Mormon, and there's not a whole lot of members of our church there. But then I went to college out in Utah, and everyone was kind enough to remind me how different I was. Yeah, I would tell people I was from Wisconsin, and they're like, "Oh, you're from the mission field?" And I thought, well, I don't know. We had missionaries. I always assumed it was their mission field. I didn't know Wisconsin was the mission field. And of course, it didn't take me long to figure out that these people from Utah called everything outside of Utah the mission field. And sometimes I would call them on it, and I'm like, hey, I've heard of people called on missions to Orem, to Provo, even Salt Lake City. Wouldn't that by definition be the mission field? And they usually just get a disgusted look and like, no. Like I was the dumb one. Now, they'd always say I was from the mission field and have a certain air of condescension in their voice. And I think what they really wanted to say was, wait a minute, you grew up with mostly non-Mormon friends, you don't drink, smoke, have green hair, or 3 illegitimate children? I was told that was not possible. Now, I live in Tennessee now, and there's not a whole lot of members of our church here, but it's different than Wisconsin because I grew up in Wisconsin in the 80s, and that is back when bullying was not just allowed, but I think it was actually encouraged as a way to maintain the social order. And since there weren't many of us Mormons there, we were ripe for the bullying. Like, I remember being outside at kindergarten recess one time, and the class bully came by and he said, "Get out of my way, Mormon teeth." Yeah, these things, Mormon teeth. I had no idea what that meant. In fact, I still don't know. But this kid had been held back 2 years already, so he was a lot bigger and taller than everyone else, but brains maybe weren't his strong suit. So I'll assume that coming up with insults that made any sense, not really his forte either. There was another time in 5th grade we were having class taught by our guidance counselor. I don't know if you still have that where, your guidance counselor comes in and teaches you like, don't do drugs, or let's plan for college. And I should say, our guidance counselor was a little unique because when he did the don't smoke lesson, he came in, lit up a cigarette, took a huge drag, puffed it into a cotton ball, walked around to show us how dark it was from just one puff of a cigarette, all while it was still lit in his other hand. I don't think that guy would get hired today. But he came in to teach us, and he had everyone stand up, and starting in one corner, you said what church you went to, and if someone else said your church name, you sat down. And to this day, I don't know if this was a lesson in religious diversity or persecution. Because Northern Wisconsin, here's how it went. First kid said Lutheran. Half the class sat down. And there were some Methodists, Catholics, Baptists. And after that, there were only 2 of us left. And I was terrified. Not because I'm embarrassed to be a member of the church. Like, I've been fine with that. But no, it's because the name of our church is so long. All these other kids got away with saying one-word responses. Lutheran, Baptist, Catholic. Our church is 9 words long. But so finally, guidance counselor pointed at me and I said, "The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints," as fast as I could and sat down. I was so embarrassed. Now, it wasn't until I had more time to think later in the day I realized, well, our nickname is just one word, Mormon. So I happily called myself a Mormon from there on out. And that worked great for 30 years. But now we can't even be Mormons anymore. And the PTSD is coming back. But what every kid who grows up Mormon outside of Utah or maybe southern Idaho really dreads is U.S. history class when they talk about the Mormons. Because there's only 2 things they really say about us. First, Brigham Young brought the pioneers across the plains and settled Utah. Like, hooray, Utah. And second, polygamy. And for some reason, the teachers always come to us like we're experts on the topic. So who had the most wives? Why did they have so many wives? Did they like having that many wives? How many moms do you have? And all we can stammer is something like, like, they got rid of polygamy 130 years ago. Like, I don't really know that much about it. Our teachers know that. They're not dumb. They're just looking for a way to bully us and show everyone we're a bunch of weirdos. Now, I've helped out at our church girls' camp the last several years, and I was sitting there at dinner last summer, and one night I wondered, what would happen if a visitor came in right now? They would see 4 men, 30 women, and 150 kids. For all they know, they'll think they just walked into a polygamist compound in Utah somewhere. And so I thought for a minute, well, what would polygamy be like? Now, if it's anything like girls' camp, I only had 2 jobs. One, take the trash out because it was really heavy. Like, I've never seen people eat so much watermelon in 1 week. And second, I would help on the high ropes course, or basically help the girls have fun. So, not exactly the most exhausting list of responsibilities. Now, the women, on the other hand, they had to plan the food, buy the food, cook the food, clean up after the food. The kids washed the tables, swept the floors. I didn't do a speck of laundry at girls' camp. And if there was ever a discipline issue, like someone's shorts were too short, they told the men, do not get involved. So I didn't even have to do any discipline. Let's just say if polygamy is all like that, there are worse lives than I can imagine. But I've actually spent a lot of time around the Young Women's program because I only have female children, and my wife has been a Young Women's leader forever. And a couple of these next jokes, I realize, refer to the old Young Women's program. I know it changed a couple years ago, but hopefully most of you are old enough to remember that. Because we had something called Young Women in Excellence. I never understood that title. Like maybe Young Women of Excellence, or Young Women doing excellent things. But it felt like I needed a therapist and half an hour to discuss how can we be young women in excellence? Because I don't know. The Young Women also had a theme that was 93 words long. That's really pretty long, and they had it memorized. They would repeat it in church every single week. Why? I'm not sure. Maybe just to prove that they're in excellence. I mean, the preamble to the Constitution is only 53 words long, and no one can seem to keep that thing memorized. Now, our young men, on the other hand, they never used to have a theme. And so the closest thing to it was the Boy Scouts with their motto. You know how long that is? 2 words long. Be prepared. That's sort of the boy way of covering all your bases. Like maybe you have a question, hey, should I go to college after high school? Well, people who get higher education tend to have higher earnings. You can care for your family better, so be prepared. Stay in school. Or maybe you have a question, should I steal this candy bar? Well, somebody is prepared, always has enough money to buy what they need, or maybe has a snack in their pocket. So be prepared. Don't steal. Now, the young women, on the other hand, buried within their 93-word theme were 8 different values that were supposed to guide them in all of their life situations. It was a little bit like having that giant mom purse with a whole bunch of really useful things mixed around inside. You know, maybe you come to your mom and you're like, hey, do you have some scissors? She says, oh, sure, I've got glue stick, tape, extra socks. You always want to have dry socks. And, scissors, here they are. They were stuck inside my Weight Watchers manual. But still, if young women had a question, they had to consult their list of values to see which applied. So maybe a question, should I go to college? Well, let's go down the list. Faith? Nah. Divine nature? Not really. Individual worth? Knowledge? Ooh, yes. We should gain as much knowledge as possible. I'll go to college. Thanks, young women's value number 4. But what if they had a hard question like, should I steal this candy bar? they might be there a while before they find the right value that applies. Faith, divine nature, individual worth, knowledge, choice and accountability? Well, that could be accountable for our choices, but what if they think about integrity? Then forget the candy bar. There's a battle between whether choice and accountability or integrity is the value that matters in a situation. And what if virtue comes up? Then there's a three-way battle going on. Like, why were there so many values and why did they all mean the same thing? I think that's why, with the new revised Young Women's program, they got rid of the Young Women's values. Now, don't worry, they made the theme longer. Instead of 93 words, it's 97 words long. So good luck keeping that thing memorized. But if we come back to polygamy. Yeah, no, just kidding. We're done with polygamy. I just say that so that if you are a Mormon, it makes your hair stand on end and you're a little bit on edge, and make sure you're still listening. But even if we put polygamy aside, I think you have to admit that we have the opposite genders in our church interact in unique ways. Take something as simple as the rule, you don't date till you're 16. Now I know, new for Strength of Youth rules came out and 16 is maybe more of a guideline than a rule. But at least when I was a kid, it was a hard and fast rule. Now, I don't think my parents watched these routines, so it's hopefully safe to say I'd kissed 4 different girls by the time I was 16. Now, I couldn't go on a date with anybody, who knows what might happen. But as you can tell, I was intrigued by the idea, so I had it all planned out. I was turning 16 on a Wednesday, gonna get my driver's license on a Thursday, going on my first date on a Friday, and I was going with a good friend of mine, but that I sort of had a crush on too. I don't know, do you guys have that? That good friend where you wouldn't mind if a little something extra happened? Now, if you're married and you nodded or laughed at that, you're going to have to break it off. I mean, break it off with your crush, not your spouse. Come on, let's use good judgment here. But everything seemed fine until about 2 weeks before my 16th birthday. My mom came in holding the For Strength of Youth pamphlet and asked, "Well, who's going on the group date with you? It says in here you're supposed to go on group dates before you start pairing off and going steady." Now, I complained. We argued. We'd known this girl for years. Her dad was the principal of the middle school. She was a good Christian. And this was one date. We weren't going steady. In fact, why were we even using that term, going steady? This was the 90s, not the 60s. But it didn't matter. Either I found somebody else to come along or no car, no date. So 2 days after my 16th birthday, I picked up my date with my little sister and her friend in the back seat. That's right, it was my mom's idea for her to bring a friend along so that it wouldn't be weird. Because let me tell you, there is nothing weird about your little sister and her friend being the chaperone on your first date. Now, I've always been a big spender, so we went to McDonald's for dinner. And luckily, my sister knew this whole thing was weird, so they sat on the far side of the restaurant. We went and watched a movie afterwards, and they sat far away from us again, which was good. But you want to guess how much action I got at the end of that date? 0. Zippo. Big old goose egg. I wasn't going to give her a kiss goodnight with my little sister and her friend, gawking from the back seat. I didn't even want to give her a hug, because that might start rumors. And luckily, I'm not from Utah, so I didn't know that it was acceptable to shake hands at the end of a date. What is this, the 1700s? Oh, much obliged for your time, ma'am. No! If you are on a date that goes so badly you think you should shake hands at the end of it, you are better off just walking away. But I know it feels like you're supposed to do something. And so I felt that too, I was there in this sort of Indian salute sort of thing. Well, Native American salute sort of thing. You don't want to offend anybody with comedy these days. It was well, it was much fun. See you Monday. It was not great. Now, I think partly because of that first date experience, I only went on 3 more dates through all of high school. And all 3 of them were prom. And you might think, well, prom, that sounds great. It's amazing. And yeah, it's fine. But prom is the most expensive date that a guy can go on. And in case you did not catch my sarcasm earlier, I took the first date of my life to McDonald's for dinner. I am not a big spender. Each one of those proms set me back over $100. But don't worry, I did kiss all 3 of those girls because for that kind of money, you're gonna get something out of the deal. So after only going on 4 dates through high school, I went to college out in Utah, and my older brother had gone there a few years before, and he went on 35 dates in his first semester. And he told us many times about this great accomplishment, and I thought it was like some Olympic world record or something. So when I went out to college, as any good younger sibling would do, I decided I had to beat him to put him in his place. So I went on 39 dates in my first semester. It's only 16 weeks long. So that was 2.5 dates a week. It was one of the hardest things I did in my whole life. But when I went out to Utah, I quickly realized that growing up in Wisconsin, I was just half Mormon. Like, there was a lot of stuff about Mormon culture that I just didn't even know existed. Like the fact that as soon as you're out of high school, or maybe back from your mission, you're supposed to be married. So yeah, you could go on a second date with somebody and people are asking, hey, you gonna propose? I'm like, well, I don't know. I've spent 4 hours with this person. I guess that's enough time to know everything I need to know about them. I mean, it's only eternity. What could go wrong? And I learned another thing in my sophomore year. I had a good friend who was a roommate. He'd been dating the same girl for about a month, and he came home one day and he's like, Matt, I just don't know if I can wait until marriage. I about fell off my chair. I mean, this guy was from Alpine, Utah, which, if you don't know your Utah geography, is halfway between Salt Lake City and Provo. So it's probably the holiest place in the world. I'm like, Rex, what are you talking about? So he says, well, in high school, a group of us made a pledge that we would only ever kiss our spouse. And I'm not sure I can wait until marriage. Turned out that he and I had a very different definition of what wait until marriage meant. I don't know if you've been doing the math, but 4 before I was 16, 3 proms, we'll just say a few others thrown in for good luck. I was in the double digits at this point. Not sure I was the right person to help him with his extreme Mormon purity dilemma. But we were good friends, and so I felt like I had to do something. So I remembered something I'd read in a Jack Wayland book. And if you're not familiar with Jack Wayland, he was a Mormon author in the 80s and 90s, sort of a Mormon Danielle Steele. He wrote the same book over and over and just gave it a different title. So I thought of something from one of his books and sort of adapted it slightly for the situation. I said, Rex, you gotta remember the vanilla theory. And he said, I don't know what the vanilla theory is. So I explained it. Let's assume there was this man named Sam. He loved vanilla ice cream. Vanilla ice cream was great. It was the best, better than anything else out there. He would only eat vanilla ice cream. Now his friend one day asked him, Sam, how can you know vanilla is the best? Have you really compared it to every other flavor? And Sam replied, no, he'd only ever tried vanilla. And his friend finally convinced him he couldn't know what was the best if he had nothing to compare it to. So Sam tried chocolate. And guess what? Chocolate was great. It was amazing. It was the best he'd ever had. Now, he still liked vanilla, but he would always choose chocolate if he could. Now, I paused at that point to let my analogy sink in, and Rex was just like, I don't know what ice cream has to do with anything. So I went all New Testament and explained the parable to him and said, if you wait to kiss someone till you're married, it will be vanilla. It'll be great. It'll be awesome. By definition, it will be the best you've ever had. But what if there's someone out there who kisses like chocolate? You might never know. And I think I almost had him convinced until I mentioned something about Baskin Robbins with 31 flavors. That was a bridge too far for him to cross. He said I was a disturbed person and our relationship was never quite the same after that. But he did break it off with that girl, and as far as I know, they never consummated their relationship. And by that, I mean, I'm using his terms. I don't think they ever kissed. Like, come on, this is a G-rated routine. But he did get married and they had 4 great kids, and I just hope for his sake, his wife kisses like chocolate. Now, my wife and I, we didn't kiss until our 3rd date, and some people think that's really fast, but some people that think you're supposed to be engaged after 2 are like, what were you waiting for? And we got engaged several months later, showed the ring to her friends, to her roommates, called up her parents. That was a bad idea. Her dad was like, oh, she is much too young. She has no money and she is too young. And he had the bright idea that we should call my parents because surely they would tell us the same thing. Now, what he didn't know is, while my wife is the oldest in her family, I'm the 5th of 6 kids. All my older siblings were married at that point. So we called up my parents, said we were engaged, and they were like, yay, that's so exciting. Hey, what date is it? We need to start planning our travel. So a little different response. But we got married that next summer and lived happily ever after. At least that's what I tell people. You'll have to find her and ask her for the truth. But we instantly dealt with that next Mormon pressure, having kids right away. In fact, we went on a 1-week honeymoon. When we came back, an uncomfortable number of people asked, is baby number 1 on the way? Now, first of all, there's no way to know. And second, it's none of your business. But it didn't get much better when we went to a married student ward back at BYU, because there, it was okay if you didn't have kids or were visibly pregnant and had only been married like 9 months. But anything after that, they would push you into the less righteous category. I mean, at least they gave you 9 months to work on it. But it was odd, right? People parading their kids around like symbols of their righteous devotion. And we lived in this place called Wymount, which people referred to as the bunny farm, because all these young couples were having so many kids, so babies were popping out like, bow, bow, bow. I've never been to a bunny farm to know how it really compares, but I've always had a sense of humor. And so when people would say Wymount, I'd say, well, why not? They are married now. And it turned out those Utah born and raised, like pure as the greatest snow on earth sort of people were caught off guard by that. And it was a bit shocking to their system, but I'm from the mission field. I didn't know any better. That's the way we roll, baby. Now, I do miss the Mormon family that has like 12 kids in it, right? There's something appealing about having so many kids. You could have a whole football team. And just think, when they all get married, you could actually play a full game both ways. That's pretty cool. In my ward growing up, there was a family with 10 kids and a family with 12 kids. Now, we had 6 in my family, which if I ever went to like a school camp or something, you're talking about their family and they're like, 6 kids? How do you guys survive? But if I ever went to a church event and said there were 6 kids in my family, they're like, your parents didn't really even try, did they? I'd think, well, I don't know. I was number 5. Like, I thought it was a reasonable effort. But some of you might be uncomfortable with talking about having kids. We'll move on. Now, you've heard probably the phrase, it's a small world in the church. You never know who you're going to run into. And that is true. But people always say that like it's a good thing. Sometimes it's not a good thing. When we were living in central Illinois, we lived in the middle of nowhere. It was 4 hours to St. Louis, 3 hours to Chicago. And I had some sort of calling where I was supposed to greet new families that we knew were moving into the ward. So I was waiting there one Sunday, looked down the hallway and saw a girl I knew from my sophomore ward at BYU. So I quick ducked around the corner. And you might wonder why I did that. Well, if you've been paying attention, you probably know we dated for a while that year. And, how to put this G-rated, she was an ice cream flavor that I had sampled. But it turns out, see, there's only one food I don't like. It is coconut. That girl's flavor was coconut. Everything about her was coconut. But I'd met my wife in that same ward, and so I thought, we should greet this new family together. So I grabbed my wife, we came out, and as they turned the corner of the hall, we froze, and 3 sets of our eyes got very large as the gravity of the situation came upon us. And the other lady spoke first. She said, Lana, I remember you. Matt, I remember you. And we both replied, yeah, we can't believe it that you moved into our ward. And it was unbelievable. We'd moved 4 times through 3 different states at this point. There are 10,000 congregations in the United States, yet those people moved into our exact ward. Now, her husband we didn't know, but he had this sort of funny grin on his face, and he pointed at me and he's like, oh, Matt, hey, that's awesome. That's my name too. That was not awesome. That was weird and uncomfortable. And I had a feeling once he talked to his wife later and understood a little better how we all knew each other, he wasn't going to think it was awesome anymore either. Now, a few months later, I had an opportunity to transfer to England for work. And while we thought it'd be cool to England, we were also like, yes, please, we need to move out of here now. And England was great. We didn't know anybody at church for 3 years. And then we had the choice when we were moving back to go back to central Illinois or to Nashville. Now, neither of us had ever been to Nashville, let alone even Tennessee. So we're like, yeah, Nashville sounds great. Let's go there. And it was good for a while, until state conference. I was looking around to see if there was anybody I knew, since, it's such a small world in the church. And I did see a guy that I had sung in the men's choir with at BYU, so that was cool. And then I saw her. No, not the her from Illinois. That would have been a sure sign that God was punishing me. This was a different her. So I remember I just started growing like, My wife's like, what is it? Well, you see that lady over there, curly hair, 4 little kids. We dated for a while after my mission. At which point my wife punched me and asked if I had dated every Mormon girl that existed. I said, no, I ran out of time. That got me another punch. But it was equally unlikely that this lady would be in our ward. See, after my mission, I moved back in with my parents in very rural northern Wisconsin. Our county had more dairy cows than humans in it. But this girl happened to work at a Boy Scout camp. We were the closest ward, so she came, we met, and we dated for a little bit. But she told me early on that she was only going to kiss her husband. And I'm like, that's fine. That's cool. Well, except there was one problem. I'd been on a mission for 2 years. My lips were parched. I needed some ice cream. So I debated getting a ring and proposing. That's how desperate I was, but I never did. Thank goodness. Because it turns out she's vegan or something weird like that. Or I shouldn't say weird. She has a food lifestyle choice that is totally incompatible with mine. But still, it's a small world in this church. And sometimes that's a good thing, but sometimes it's not.